What's going on, guys? Running it back with not quite a tier list. I decided that I'm not really going to be doing something super standard. I'm going to be trying to talk about things in a little bit more of a nuanced way rather than just breaking it down by something being like stupendously strong and whatnot, just like SA and through down to like D tier. It works, but I want to try and talk about things and give you like a breakdown of how they can be used under all circumstances, if possible. Not everything is good. Not everything is usable. Obviously, there's gonna be stuff that's just significantly worse off than other units. But I'm gonna just go ahead and start jumping in here. Core unit. Core unit is like basically the thing that you're almost always going to be using, or at the very least is good in damn near every circumstance. Strong, obviously something that you can mix in and it's going to do really well. Strong but situational. Those units that are very, very good in certain matchups and not really that good in others. Highly niche is similar, but even more difficult to get value out of necessarily. Um, it can perform well, but it's usually only good against one or two factions, and even in those matchups, it's being brought to counter very specific play styles. And then bad is just bad. It's not really going to find a whole lot of use for it under any circumstance. That's kind of the breakdown here. So without further ado, we'll just get right into this, and we can start off with the Beast Lord here. In terms of the Beastmen Lords, you're almost never going to see the Beast Lord here. It's pretty bad. Not completely useless, though. There are a couple of abilities that it's got that I think actually make it good in a very specific scenario. We can flip over and maybe start to break it down a little bit, just so that you get an idea of what I'm trying to get across to you. So, just at base, pretty weak. Foot Lord doesn't have anything too exceptional here. Like, fairly quick for a Foot Lord, I guess. It's going to have 42 speed with Primal Fury. Doesn't have great leadership. Is very squishy on the HP. And really no passives to speak of. But you put him on a Chariot. Gets up to 5,700 HP. The Tuskor Chariots are okay, but the Razorgore Chariots are way better because of the extra mass. And they just have better stats overall. I mean, the Tuskor is just a straight downgrade, essentially, but these Razorgore Chariots, man, are absolutely nasty. And the Beast Lord here with Apocalyptic Vision and Horn of the First Beast. These give some pretty serious buffs to melee attack and leadership in conjunction with one another. Horn of the First Beast especially has a really long duration and a huge effect range of 55 meters. Its recharge is kind of hard to get off, though, because it only recharges if you're engaged in melee, and since you're on a Chariot, oftentimes you're going to be pulling in and out of combat, and you can't leave this guy to grind when he's on the Chariot either because of the weak melee defense. He can get chewed up pretty badly, but this is the ability combo where I think that maybe he can find some uses. If you think your opponent's going with like just a straight infantry line, like a melee infantry line, you can bring this guy in and bring a whole bunch of Chariots and other really nasty units, like maybe like a Pestigore Rush, lots of Gore Herd, Centaur Great Weapons, Razorgore Herd, stuff like that. And just blitz that line and just pop all of these buffs, trying to keep them stacked up so you always have extra melee attack going. And you could probably bulldoze the line that way. You've got to have perfect execution, though, to do this. That's kind of why this guy sits in the highly niche category. But even if you don't bring these and you just go for like the cheapest possible Chariot Lord, he wouldn't be terrible. I mean, I'll talk about Kazrak in a bit, but, the Razorgore Chariots and the Tuskor Chariots are just really good at clearing out infantry. So if you're going up against infantry-heavy factions, just using this guy at base to run stuff down and just clear through them with the crazy charge bonus and weapon strength, he'll be killing infantry models left, right, and center. and probably get you 1250 back pretty quickly. So if you just bring him bare bones, he could even have a little bit of a use there. That's obviously comes with some caveats that still pretty snipeable, still something that's going to struggle against anything that's not infantry. Any kind of mass is going to just bog this guy down, and he's probably going to get iced pretty quickly that way. You know, but the stats on the Razor Gore, pretty solid. You know, like I said, good HP pull at 5,700. 100 armor is nice. 70 leadership is pretty strong. Good speed, that goes up with Primal Fury, of course, active. As long as he's higher than 50% leadership, he gets that 10% speed boost. So really around 77 speed. Melee attack, small boost from Primal Fury, but is at 38 at base. Not that great. Melee defense very weak at 32, as I mentioned. It's really the weapon strength and that charge bonus. 400 weapon strength with 90 charge bonus. These guys can impact into SEs and do some decent damage. The problem is chariots have a hard time disengaging from single entities, so you can't really use them to bumper cars people safely because he'll just get obliterated because he's very squishy on the melee defense front. So any kind of like moderately large SE with decent combat prowess probably going to bulldoze over this guy if you're trying to bumper cars him. So that's really all there is to say about this guy. Not terrible, but damn close. And definitely some better options for the Beastmen. Beastmen have really powerful lords, and one of those we'll be getting into next. Kazarak, I think, is wildly underrated by people. We'll get into him right now and start talking about why I think that is. Now, he's very similar to a Beast Lord in a lot of ways. Fairly mediocre on foot, but he's got much better defensive stats. You can see right here, right off the bat, he's got a little bit more HP, up to about 4,900. His armor is at 100 with 75 leadership. Is it also a little bit faster on foot. 42 speed at base, that goes up with Primal Fury, so he's got about 50 foot speed. He's got much better melee defense. So much stronger on that front. 52 melee defense is actually pretty chunky. With 490 weapon strength, so he gets a little bit extra there, and a good charge bonus on foot, but you don't really want to be bringing him for that. Foot Lords for Beastmen are just kind of a waste in my book. He doesn't really do anything too wild. You could potentially bring him on foot in the Slanesh matchup, where he can be really hard to snipe. And with Scourge, he can put a beatdown on Azazel, potentially, but there are other characters you need to be careful of in that matchup. Kazarak won't do nearly as good against, but despite all of that, you put him on the Chariot is what he's really good for. Again, the Razor Gore Chariot, the best bet. The Tusk Gore Chariot, you're already paying for the Chariot. There's a limited number of Chariots you can bring. You might as well pay the premium for the much more powerful version, because these things just flatten infantry like nobody's business. It's so brutal. If this is the guy to go for, if you're going for a Beastman Lord that you just want to run over infantry with, Kazarak is an absolute nightmare for people to stop. He is so fast, with so much charge bonus and good mass, with a decent HP pull. Plus, he's got a little bit more tankiness with the Dark Mail, which is a very powerful item, honestly. It's not perfect. It's only enabled in melee, so the Chariots, obviously you're pulling in and out of combat a lot, so it's not always active, but if your opponent is bringing snipe spells and trying to snipe your Lord as the Beastman, which is honestly not super uncommon, because the other options, there's no healing for any of the Beastman Lords, other than Morgur. We'll get into Morgur later. But outside of him, there's no healing on any of these Lords, so they can be snipeable from stuff like Spirit Leech, or even if in, like, the mirror match, you're going for, like, Traderkin. It's another good Spirit Leech type of spell that can do a lot of damage to SEs. The Dark Mail gives 25% spell resistance and 20% damage resistance, so any spell casting is losing 45% of its effectiveness when it's attacking Kazarak and he's in combat. And all you have to do when your opponent casts a spell on you is just run into an infantry unit. He's also going to be mitigating a lot of the damage from those units that he's fighting on top of because of that damage resist, and he gets extra armor. So even if he's fighting on top of a spear unit, he's going to be a lot safer because he's not going to be taking a lot of damage from non-AP sources. And I just love this guy, man. I mean, he really is an incredibly disruptive lord, and it's pretty easy to get 1650 value back on him. He's just a mean machine, man. Infantry killing powerhouse, and I like his performance in a lot of matchups. So I like him up and strong. I guess you could maybe argue that he belongs down here, but with good micro, I think he's just a really strong, solid option. And it's very hard to lock him down and catch him. If he does get surrounded by mass, then he is probably going to die. So matchups where there's like Hellstriders or decent anti-large units with high mass that can lock him in place, and then he can get answered by another SC or just by that unit, period. He's a lot less useful, but you can also pull opponents to their doom by that same token trying to chase him down, just because he is so fast with the 70 movement speed. Oftentimes going to be 77 thanks to the Primal Fury there. Alright. Swapping back over. Again, strong but situational potentially, but really I think with good micro he's up here. Moving on to the Doom Bull. Doom Bull is very strong. Really solid combat character for the Beastmen. Very cheap as well. Flipping over here. Getting into him and just pointing out what makes him so capable. Paired down with pretty much nothing, he's only 1250, which is the same price as the Beast Lord on the Razor Gore Chariot, so very similar like category of Lord. Has so much more health though. 6600 is actually pretty beefy. With 100 armor, 80 leadership, very high leadership for a Beastman Lord. 64 speed, again you get, doesn't actually have Primal Fury, I forget about that. Has Blood Greed instead, which makes him immune to Psychology, which means no terror routing from anything, since Blood Greed is always giving immune to Psychology at base. He gets the extra melee attack, charge bonus, and AP weapon strength, as long as he's getting kills, maxes at 200, kind of hard to get to 200 with the Doom Bull. But for a 1250 Lord, can definitely provide you some pretty good utility, just running around, beating up on stuff, and has the dazed effect, which is a very underrated contact effect. Lowers melee defense and speed, so it makes him a little bit more likely to actually make contact with this fairly mediocre melee attack. You know, 47's pretty low, all things considered, and it doesn't get really any natural boosts unless you're bringing Slaughterer's Call and Barbed Knuckle Boxing. That's making him a lot more expensive. I'll talk about these abilities in just a moment and whether they're worth it or not, but, you know, this helps a lot with his damage output and makes him decent at dueling SEs, but really you want to use him to just run around and try to avoid getting sniped and also just charge through units and be an annoyance. That good weapon strength and decent charge bonus means he is fairly good at pinballing over stuff, and he's got really high mass at 3,500, so very, very hard to lock down and isolate with units of any type. Slaughterer's Call, probably the item you want to bring the most, as long as you're in melee combat with this guy. You get more melee attack and leadership on everything around you, including himself, so he gets up to 55 melee attack at that point. And he gets 88 leadership, making him really, really hard to break off the field by route, and especially in conjunction with the ITP. You're having a pretty good time with this dude. And your opponent has to commit a lot more to try and snipe him down. Barbed Knuckle Boxing gives him more melee attack and weapon strength, which can be really strong, especially if you want to use him to fight other SEs on a very consistent basis. That really gets him up there in a category of his own where he can really brawl and do quite nicely for you without giving away too much of an opportunity to get the damage in, while trading poorly, because at base, without Barb Knuckle Boxing, it can struggle fighting other SCs because of the weak melee defense and mediocre melee attack. It's really the dazed effect you want, and you want him to be fighting with other units who can really churn out the damage thanks to the lowered melee defense and speed contact effect he provides. Deadly Onslaught's not that good. Just leave it off, honestly. It's very rare that this is going to provide you a lot of value, but even if you brought him with everything and you were using all these buffs, he can get in there and brawl pretty nicely and do some pretty good damage. And probably get you back the 1750, but really just super cheap with Slaughterer's Call. At 1450 is probably going to be the best way to use him. Beastmen have so many other strong units on the roster that trying to bring your lords as cheap as possible to maximize the potential of the rest of the units on the roster is usually the way to go. And this guy obviously doesn't cast spells, so it can it gotta factor in the cost of a caster as well when you're trying to bring the Doom Bowl. Flipping back over, we got the Great Bray Shamans on the Chariots, another very strong option for the Beastmen. Flipping back over, just to point out the strengths of this guy, awful on foot. Do not bring these guys on foot. They are so vulnerable. Super squishy HP pool, very squishy on the armor, pretty low leadership, terrible speed, terrible every which way you look at it when on foot. But you put them on the Chariots, they get a lot better. Razor Gores versus Tuskgores, again, I just always recommend the Tuskgore Chariots. They just give more HP, more mass, better stats, period. It just behooves you to always use these guys on them more often than not. You get a great selection of magic choices here. Basically, all the really strong lores are available here. Lore of Wilds for the Beastmen, ironically, probably the weakest outside of Traderkin. You've got some good spells that are decent in some other matchups, like Devolve is really good against Khorne, where you're lowering speed, melee attack, and leadership, all of those being very devastating for the Blood Gods units. You can spam this in Bray Scream, which does all AP damage. Buffed up, it gives a little bit of extra strength, but you really want to just cast the base version so you don't miscast on this guy, because even on the Tuskgore, or on the Razor Gore Chariot, I should say, it's only got 5,000 HP. Still a little bit squishy if he gets caught. Really, this guy's here just to roll around to the back line and run over stuff that's trying to dive your Ungor Raiders. Good against like Furies and Harpies and Fellbats and stuff like that. Hound units also struggle against these Great Bray Shamans on the Chariots. They're very good at running over Hound units, and that's really what he's best at. Just a good backline sweeper unit, good at running over enemy infantry that may break through your rather flimsy front lines at times. And then in the late game, he can also provide some utility there. Other lores that are strong, Beasts, Death, Shadows, all very capable. And you just want to pare down the spells to what you think you're going to need most, you know. We'll talk about these abilities in a minute. Does have access to the Forbidden Rod, which can give him a nice boost to the Winds of Magic, as well as some extra reserves, but does a little damage to himself. It's not that much damage. I think if you use all three of these, the most HP he's going to take out of himself is around, let's see, what is it? I think he can take about 1,000 of his own HP out. Which can definitely hurt you. Yeah, you're losing on the low end about 368 HP. On the upper end of things, you can lose about 759. So it's really risky to bring Forbidden Rod. Generally, I would advise against it since these guys don't have access to healing. But if you think you're just going to be using these guys to spam spells out, it can be nice. Like, you know, just popping Flock of Doom in Pans all game, or Death Magic, you're just Spirit Leeching and using Fate of Buna a bunch. Shadows magic, you want to spam Melkoth's and Enfeebling Foe, maybe the Withering as well. Shadows magic, probably the best one to use with the Forbidden Rod, just because the spells are so strong, and they've got decent cast range on them, so you can keep this guy farther in the back line. Wilds magic, you can get like a couple extra Traderkins if you use the Forbidden Rod, or you get one extra Traderkin. Probably the weakest Lore of Magic to use Forbidden Rod with. Honestly, I'd leave it off, just so you don't blow your own Lord up. And just live with what you got. You get plenty of WOM in matches anyways. With good targeting priority on the spells, you're going to get a pretty good chunk of value out of these guys. Now, one thing that is a little annoying about them is they can be a little pricey with a lot of stuff added onto them. Paring them down, though, they get to a pretty reasonable cost. And again, you want your lords to be very cheap for the Beastmen, just so you can maximize bringing all of the other good tools here. The lords, again, try to just stay alive and get as much value out of the magic or what combat utility they provide. And, yeah, I mean, I love these dudes. They're probably a little bit stronger than the other combat lords, quite honestly. In fact, I hate to do it. I'm going to move Khazarek down to strong, but situational. I mean, that really does fit his role a little bit better, since he is just basically full anti-infantry. The Doom Bull, very capable fighter, if you do decide to bring him, but Great Bray Shaman probably going to be a little bit better than him. Just as a general rule, because you're combining your Lord and your caster in one, and you've got good Lords of Magic. Very rare that the Great Bray Shamans are gonna just completely flub it, but you do need to be very careful of the sniping potential on these guys, because they are much squishier than a lot of the other Lords, while also being a fair bit slower than the strongest Lord option, who we're going to be talking about now, who is also by far and away the best hybrid caster option for the Beastmen, which is going to be Malagor, the Dark Omen. Malagor is just an absolute beast, dude. Oh my god. Every time I bring him, he's getting well over 2,000 value. Flipping over, we can start talking about why it is that he's so strong. Now, he is incredibly squishy when it comes to sniping potential, but he does still have 4,900 HP. Which is just about the same as a Great Bray Shaman on the Chariot, on the Razor Gore, no less, who's got, what, 5,000, I believe? Pretty flat. Yeah, 5,064. So he's got, what, 80 less HP? Oh my goodness, such a downgrade, but not really. He can be sniped out of the air, but that's going to be because of spell casting. He is ridiculously fast. With 110 speed, almost nothing is catching this guy in the air. And with the way aerial combat works, as long as you're running away, nothing's really going to be hitting you. He's good in just about every matchup. I struggle to think of anything outside of Slaanesh and Demons of Chaos where he might be a little bit at risk. You know, really strong snare factions can punish him, but again, those snares usually have about 100-meter effect range on them. Meaning they have to get fairly close to you, and with 110 speed, you can stay away from him pretty easily. His leadership's a little low. If you want to give him a little bit of a buff, you can bring Icons of Vilification, which gives 12 extra leadership in an effect radius, which is honestly not bad at all. It's a pretty nice item, especially in matchups where you think that your opponent might be trying to terror bomb you or use their own like Doom and Darkness type effects to try and leadership break your fairly low leadership units, because that is kind of one of the calling cards of the Beastmen is leadership in the 60s or less on a lot of the units on your roster. You can bring Icons and hover him over fights. That does mean you have to actually get within range of combats, though, which can be a risk. And generally, I find him to just be perfectly fine as a Flock of Doom and Enfeebling Foe caster. You just spam that all game. You've got Unholy Power with lots of power recharge rate. Keeps him nice and topped up on the WOM at all times. You get Bestial Surge proccing over and over again, which for the Beastman is absolutely disgusting. It gives 15% charge bonus, and charge bonus is a big selling point on the Beastman. A lot of your units are up into like the 40s on the reg, and that 15% extra can tip them over to where they're just absolutely trashing units when they make contact. So it's really nice to have, plus lowering vigor on everything by 9% per cast. As long as you stack your spells consciously, you can keep your stuff at like fairly high vigor levels for most of the game. You will only be running out of magic by the 10, 11, 12 minute mark. Usually the Beastmen, the way the Beastmen play is very aggressive, so if you haven't won the game by that point, you're probably in a little bit of trouble more than likely already. But even if you are getting to that stage, you're summoning units in that are going to be fresh anyways. So that by that point, even if you're running out of magic, the Bestial Surge isn't nearly as important. And then you're just trying to keep Malagor alive. And also harry down vulnerable FCs. Like, Malagor can duel with quite a bit more than you would think he can. You need to be careful because of his low armor. But he's really good at harrying down a lot of skirmish units, as well as vulnerable lords, like Slans. I've actually had a pretty fun time using this guy, and dive-bombing Slan on the Lizardman roster, because they're very weak combat characters with low melee defense and low damage output. If they do hit him, they can chunk his HP pretty badly, again, because he's got low armor. But he's got good decent melee defense and pretty good melee attack, and he gets Primal Fury, so he gets a little bit more melee attack. 55 is pretty solid with relatively strong weapon strength, and he's got a good charge bonus in his own right. So you can run in and enfeebling foe stuff and pound them down and weaken them and force inopportune heals out of your opponent, as well as just having Flock of Doom and just rolling around and casting this on all the mobility that your opponent can bring to bear. Just chunking them down. I mean, Malagor, again, like I said, routinely gets up over 2,000 value on a pretty regular basis, while also being really hard to snipe, and just being really obnoxious, man. Absolutely the best option in my book. You will see him almost all the time, unless you have really good sniping tools on Lords. Just because of his survivability and speed, as well as the good spell options he's got here. Now, he does have Mantle of Gorok, which I think is honestly a lot better than people give it credit for. I think it's situationally useful. Doom of Darkness you can use in demon matchups where you want to crumble stuff down. Generally, I don't bring him into Khorne, but if you go into Khorne, you can do Enfeebling Foe and Doom and Darkness instead of Flock of Doom, since Flock of Doom's not very good against Khorne. And you can, like, you know, leadership bomb stuff, as well as weaken the melee stats of Khorne, which they really hate to deal with. It can make those fights a lot easier on you. Penumbral Pendulum and Savage Dominion aren't really all that good. They're quite expensive. And Penumbral Pendulum is a pretty weak wind spell. It does okay damage. It's really only good against moderately armored stuff. Upgraded, it's even more expensive. You don't get that much more damage. You get a little extra AP on it. But then you're miscasting and possibly damaging Malagor, who's already got a pretty low HP pool. Generally, Flock of Doom and Enfeebling Foe is all you're going to need. You can mix in Mantle of Gorok if you want, just if you think that you're going to be able to get decisive engagements against your opponent, where the extra melee attack and weapon strength can make a big difference. And losing armor on Beastman units, there really aren't a lot of armored units in this roster, period, so it's not that big of a deal if you lose 30 armor. It does make them a little squishier, but just the extra melee attack can be so nice for some of the tools that you've got here, like Minotaurs, even like Chaos Spawn can benefit from it greatly. Like a Senegor Great Weapon, getting on top of a enemy Lord or Caster, and you get Gorok on top of them. they will absolutely shred that unit. It's really gross. So, a little bit more situational, but still fairly useful. And, of course, you know, these are usually what you'll see from this guy. Alright. I feel like I've talked about Malagor enough. We can move on now. Well, probably the only lord that I'd be putting up here on a regular basis. The other two lords we've got here, Morgr and Torox. Morgr, I see people bringing him, and I really don't understand why. He's almost a bad lord option for you, but if you're talking about somebody that's going to be damn near impossible to snipe, especially at range, which can be somewhere that a lot of these Beastmen lords take a bunch of damage, it's going to be Morgr. He is basically immune to missile attacks. Moving over here, I can show you why. It's just the fact that he's got 75% missile resistance. Outside of that, though, he's honestly quite vulnerable. He's got regeneration, which makes him very weak to fire damage, so any faction with reasonable amounts of fire damage are just going to absolutely shred this guy. Especially in melee, where he doesn't really get any resistances. He's got a little bit of spell resistance at base, too. It's not that big of a deal. But if you think your opponent's coming in with, like, a bunch of, like, dragons, and they're going to be trying to, like, breath attack you into the Shadow Realm, Morgr can avoid that pretty well. He's, funnily enough, Elspeth is really awful at sniping Morgr because of that missile resistance, because Coruscating Blast is a missile attack. That's where most of the damage comes from. So he just basically nullifies the incredible sniping potential of Elspeth just by existing. He's got 6,000 HP with his regen. He can regen quite a bit and hang in there. But other than he's super slow. He's not really getting around the battlefield all that quickly. He doesn't get Primal Fury, so he doesn't get a buff to the speed. He's got poison on his melee attack, which is pretty solid at 55, 45 melee defense. Fairly strong. Weapon strength is 400, which isn't that good. Relatively high charge bonus, though. So if he does make contact with something, he can do a little bit of damage with that extra damage output from the charge bonus. But, you know, really the only other selling point is the spawn summons, which are fairly strong. The spawn summons, you get 2 of them. One is castable off of a Stave of Ruinous Corruption. Within 50 meters of himself, he can pop out a Chaos Spawn unit. It is the Beastman variant, which has poison, which is really nice. You can potentially snare stuff with this. It's like a pseudo-snare in a way because of the high mass on Chaos Spawn. You know, they're unbreakable, so your opponent has to kill them or avoid them. You know, of course, these guys have 42 foot speed, so they're fairly quick. As long as you get this on top of, like, infantry or behind a cavalry unit to, like, lock them in place while you've got them engaged from the front, you can guarantee some value for yourself. But once these spawn summons are gone, he really doesn't do much else. He, like, sits on a point all game and just fights. And that's very limited. It's kind of like a Dowie Lord, but more expensive. And, you know, if you've ever played the Dwarves and brought, like, a hero squad, your heroes are also similarly slow. People just avoid foot characters. They don't even fight them anymore, more often than not. Maybe they will if they have the right kind of tool, but Morgr's just kind of expensive with the spawn summons, without a lot of battlefield utility, so I really think he's highly niche, just in my personal opinion, and he doesn't really buff anything around him either. He's got Call of Violence, which is a super limited duration leadership buff. It's 16 leadership, but I mean, if your units need that leadership for 14 seconds, I don't really know what kind of situation you're in, but it's probably already a lost cause for the units. It's got a low cooldown, but whatever. Foe Seeker, I mean, Foe Seeker is not going to help him a lot on the speed front. The Vigor Reduction is okay, I guess, but I don't know. This guy needs a little bit of milk. I think Perfect Vigor on him would be a really nice move just to give him a little bit more utility around the battlefield, because once he gets tired, he's also just worse in the melee attack category, and that just limits him even further. So, use him if you're afraid of snipes. He's very forgiving, but his actual potential is also very limited for a lot of the same reasons he's very forgiving to snipe attempts. Like low speed, so it's not really worth rampaging him. Fairly high HP pool, regen, means he's, hard to snipe when you stack on top of the missile resistances and spell resistance. So it's just like a low floor, low ceiling type of character. Really not a lot to talk about outside of that. Oh, I gotta mention Spirit Essence of Chaos and how it works. So this spawn, it's just like Arball's spawn summon, but it's not targetable. It just automatically procs when a unit is at 20% hit points or less within a 50 meter radius of Morgur, which really isn't all that great. It's fine, but it means that it's going to be a lot harder to get maximum value with like trying to trap stuff. And you can activate it, or it activates automatically, and then you can have the spawn like beat up on something else. But if Morgur just gets surrounded by something, like something really low health, you can cheese it out. Like send a cavalry in over to just cause Morgur to trigger this automatically, and then that unit dies. And then his Chaos Spawn summon is just in the middle of nowhere doing nothing. And that can be really painful. There's ways to avoid it. I wish this were like an actual triggerable type of ability. I think it would make it a little bit stronger. As it stands, it's mediocre at best. So, just another thing that I feel holds him back overall. Taurox. I'm going to put Taurox as strong but situational. He's very expensive, but he is a really strong combat fighter. I think you'd see him a lot less than a Khazrak even, who's already fairly niche, but I do think the two of these guys have a lot more to give than people credit them. We can flip over and talk about Taurox a little bit. 2350 at base is kind of crazy, but he's got 7,000 HP. He's got the most HP out of any of the lords here. He's got a little bit of survivability buff in Brass Body, which gives him 40% damage resistance and 24 more melee defense. 41 second duration. It does only recharge if engaged in melee. I would like to see this potentially get buffed up by just removing the engaged in melee requirement. I think it's fair, just because him having to stay in melee all the time does make him a little bit squishier, and for his price point, obviously, he just doesn't get a lot of play because of that. With his good kit, which I think is Brass Body and Slaughterer's Call, he's 2,000 gold. You use Brass Body to keep him from getting just monstrously sniped and murdered by stuff, while Slaughterer's Call gives him a nice little boost in the leadership department and melee attack, as well as buffing anything around him. Blood Beast is maybe good in a couple matchups where it's got a decent duration on it. It's not, is it triggerable? I can't actually remember. I don't ever bring it myself. But if you're using this, it's got a decent little duration with a fairly large size radius, so against like cavalry or something trying to like lock him down, you can punish them a little bit with that AP in a radius around him. That also imbues the burnt effect, which lowers leadership. It's fine. Not that big of a deal. Rune Tortured Axe is just terrible. I mean, it's on a cooldown when it starts. It only starts lowering once you engage in melee combat, which I guess is fine, but it doesn't give that much of a benefit, quite frankly. Like, 8 more melee attack isn't that big of a selling point to me, honestly. Especially when you just factor in that you already get more melee attack from Slaughter's Call, and you've got Blood Greed on this guy, where he's already going to get up to 16 more melee attack. Like, I don't really care that much for this thing. It's just making him more expensive. Just cut it. Get him down to as reasonably cheap as you can while still having fairly strong abilities, like an anti-snipe, as well as a AoE buff. And for 2,000 gold, he could be a really good fighter on the ground for you with some cap weight, you know? Good against, you know, a handful of other fighty factions. Like, he's okay against Khorne. He's situationally good against the Greenskins. Greenskins, you need to play pretty carefully with them so that he doesn't get surrounded by their anti-large boars or biggins. But he's got pretty high armor. Good leadership. Again, he's got 7,300 HP, which is quite a bit. Good speed at 64, so he can move around pretty nicely. 53 melee attack is fairly low, all things considered, but he gets a little bit more from Slaughter's Call and Blood Greed, charging at all times. He's got a lot of mass at 4,500. He can bulldoze through formations and actually charge up the Blood Greed pretty aggressively at times if he's running over infantry. Melee defense is pretty poor. I mean, maybe not poor. It's okay at 47. Higher than most of the other lords that you've got here on the roster. But for a dedicated melee character that charges up abilities in melee combat, that's the reason why I don't think Rune Tortured Axes is all that good. Is because if he's just sitting in combat all the time, he's just going to get worked down. He's better as a bulldozer type of character, running from combat to combat, giving buffs, and being able to stick in every now and then when you really need him to. And beat up on something high value where that 500 weapon strength really comes online and does a lot of work for you with a good charge bonus of 54. So there's stuff to like here, but I think is, you know, he needs to be used sparingly. If people are expecting him, he gets a lot worse. I think right now I can justify giving him a position as strong but situational just because he's very unexpected. And the surprise value and appearance of him can really catch people off guard, and they can really underestimate how much work he can do if he's used properly. Anything else to talk about with him? Not really. He's got good armor, which is nice. I mean, 130 armor, as you may have seen there, means he's pretty resilient when it comes to fighting non-AP units, which is where he can really prosper. Just like running over like medium tier infantry, and also beating up on other combat type characters. Oh, that is probably where he shines the most. To come back to him for just one more second, if you think your opponent's going to be bringing a bunch of like say in the Greenskins matchup, you think they're going to be bringing a bunch of extra like foot characters, like Night Goblin Shamans, and maybe like a Black Orc Big Boss, or something like that. He can absolutely knock those kind of characters out of the park with his much better combat prowess and crazy high weapon strength. He can really bully those type of characters around. And then any other combat type of lords, or even better, if he can catch a spellcaster, he'll just massacre as well. So that's probably his best opportunity to get value. Moving on, we can get into the characters now. And we can start off here with the Bray Shaman. You know, strong but situational. I mean, I put them here not because they're not good characters, but more just because you're probably bringing Malagor or a Great Bray Shaman already. So they're really only here if you're bringing Doombull or Khazrak or Torox, or God forbid Morgur, which I would highly dissuade people from doing. So they're fairly similar to the Great Bray Shaman. Not like truly identical, but almost so. Like the difference is that they're way cheaper. They've got the exact same lures of magic, so really nothing to talk about there. No Forbidden Rod, but you don't really need that. They've got the Jagged Dagger, which can give them some nice power recharge if they need it. You know, if you're going to spam spells or just cast a bunch of really expensive ones, it can be really nice. It's got a long duration on it, as well as a short cooldown. It does have to recharge in melee, though, which can be a little annoying. And generally, they're coming in with like 1 or 2 spells, so they're around 1,000 gold. Maybe a little bit less. I usually just bring them as bare bones as possible to lower the cost, since you are bringing them with, you know, Doombolt, Torox, or Kazrak, you know, which does start to get into the moderately more expensive territory for the Beastmen in terms of their leadership core. Again, their options are strong and cheap for the cheap and strong for the cost, I should say. Good grief, I'm trying to talk today, just going absolutely all over the place. But cheap but strong is what you generally want to go for. If you're going for more elite stuff, you want to cut down on costs everywhere else that you can, and maximize the cost efficiency of your units. So just bring them on a Tusk score with like Flock of Doom, or Spirit Leech and Buna and Chariot. You know, like 1,000 gold isn't that much for really strong lures of magic. I mean, these guys can get you about 1,800 value, and they can run over infantry on the Tusk Chariots, you know? It's really not that bad. This is the only character I would recommend going with the Tusk instead of the Razor Gore, because again, it's an extra 200 gold. The stats are nice, the extra armor's nice, a little bit more HP, but in this scenario, just cutting down on costs is worthwhile in my book. And you don't really want to be spending a whole bunch of time running stuff over because, again, they've got very poor stats no matter what mount they're on. If they get caught, they're going to die, probably. And the spell utility is really where these guys shine, so just use them for their lures and not much else. And you should be pretty happy. Alright. Last couple characters here. You got Wargores, which we're going to talk about next. These things almost, man, I almost say they're a core unit, but I think they're just really strong. They're kind of crazy. They really are. I've had a couple of games. I had one on stream against Nurgle where the Wargore was fighting some insanely powerful characters and monsters, and it got 1,900 value with just the most bare-bones kit imaginable. I don't know how to describe foot Wargores to you without just talking about their efficiency in terms of damage output. I regularly see them 2x their value, and even if they don't, there is another synergy combo that they can bring to the table. So just starting out at base on foot, which is where I think they're strongest, because you put them on the chariots, they get more expensive, and you've already got plenty of characters on chariots, and you've got really strong chariots in the Razor Gores and Tusk Gores on the base roster. You're limited to bringing 4 in total across the whole roster, so bringing these guys on the chariots I don't think is worth it ever, honestly. And on foot, they're pretty damn tough. I mean, they've got 80 armor, silver shields. Their HP's limited to about 4,000, which means they can get beaten up pretty badly in the wrong kind of circumstances. But they're dirt cheap. They've got good melee attack, solid melee defense. They get a little extra from Primal Fury in terms of the melee attack. You know, extra speed for the 38-foot speed, so they can catch a lot of stuff on the ground too. 65 leadership isn't great, but it's not terrible. They encourage themselves, which gives them an extra 4. So 69 leadership, haha, very funny number. And with Primal Fury active, they have ITP, so as long as they're not like horrendously low on HP, they're oftentimes going to be just hanging in against some otherwise pretty unworldly foes. And with the 400 weapon strength and a bonus versus infantry of 20, they can actually beat up on stuff. They got 50 charge bonus on foot too, so they're pretty nasty. People really underestimate these guys. So if they just run in with at 600 gold and 2x their value, that's just beautiful. absolutely clutch, and they're annoying cap weight, because you double them up. Like, this is usually the core I go with if I'm bringing double Wargores on foot. Got Bestial Surge here, Flock Doom and Enfeebling Foe. They stay pretty vigored up with Bestial Surge proccing all the time. You can pop Enfeebling Foe and they can double team something much more expensive than them, and it's really funny to watch. I've done it many times, especially against Nurgle and some of the demon factions, where these guys can really clown on much more expensive characters. Pretty awesome. Will of the Dark Gods, talking about their abilities and items real quick, I'll just get into those. Will of the Dark Gods is the only one you want to bring, really. Gives melee defense and leadership and a radius around them, which can make them a little bit more tanky and buff up units that they're next to. That'll get them up to like 73 leadership for the most part, as well as giving them 45 melee defense, and that extra 5 melee defense can make a big difference, you know. Any increase to stats is pretty damn strong, so it's worth having. Situationally, it does make them more expensive, but Malagor and Double Wargore is already pretty cheap and combat capable. So popping that in every now and then on one or both can be nice. Can be nice. Deadly Onslaught, leave it off. Potion of Speed, even worse. I don't know what this thing is. Ugh. Terrible. Does nothing for you. You get one use out of it, and that's it. If it were like multiple uses, the vigor reduction would be nice, but as it stands, just leave it off. Like, no purpose in having a one-use potion that just buffs up speed and lowers vigor only 36%. Sort of anti-heroes gives them 50% weapon strength of both types, which is nice. It's almost usable, but generally I'd just leave it off. I mean, it's another 150 gold. And, again, you're not bringing them on the chariots and stuff, which does make it a little bit harder to use sort of anti-heroes. As opposed to Will of the Dark Gods, that's just always active. This is activatable, and it's active for 40 seconds, but with them on foot, people can just disengage from them more often than not. And it's the surprise value of the Wargore that really sells these guys, as well as the synergy that I'm going to talk about right now, which is using them to break bracing on spear and halberd units so that Razor Gores can run over them. This is one of the nastier, unexpected 1-2 combos in the game. It's especially good against like High Elves, Dark Elves, factions that bring lots of spears and stuff like that, where Razor Gores can get boxed out. What you do is you run the Wargores into the spear unit, they break the bracing. They're also going to be doing a lot of damage since they're fighting an infantry unit. They got that 20 bonus versus infantry on their melee attacks, which means they're going to clear through those guys pretty nicely. And then the Razor Gore chariots run in and just flatten the unit. It's awesome. You know, you're talking about spending quite a bit of gold to pull this combo off, but against a lot of factions, it is shockingly effective, and it can absolutely break open the early engagements in your favor really fast and put your opponent so far on the back foot that they cannot recover before they just start getting swept back into their own deploy zone. And if that happens against the Beastmen, you're pretty screwed. If the Beastmen are pushing you back to your deploy zone, they're fast enough with so much Vanguard deployment, you are never going to recover before the game is over. Or damn close. The Beastmen's big selling point, what makes them so strong, is just the cost efficiency and the aggression. They are one of the best stuffing factions in the game. For all of their charge bonus, all of their speed getting up into the fight again once they get summoned back out, and they'll just run over you if you're not prepared. You know, are the Beastmen OP right now? They're really close. I don't think they are, but they're very hard to play against, and because they're banned all the time, people get less and less familiar with their matchup against the Beastmen. Excuse me. Which means that, you know, just makes it more likely that when you do go up against the Beastmen, they can just bring in all of these units that you're not used to seeing and knowing counters to. And they just absolutely clown on you by pushing you into your spawn zone, and then you feel bad and you look dumb, and you don't want to play the faction against the faction ever again, which I really can't blame people for. It's a little sad because Beastmen, I love playing them. They're my second favorite faction in the game, in terms of, like, actually, going into tournaments with. They're probably, honestly, I'm probably better with Beastmen than Khorne. Khorne is a little limited because they don't have magic, and the Beastmen have so many good lures, as I've been talking about. They just love bullying you with their magic and cost-effective infantry, and there's just so many. There's honestly not that many unviable units on the Beastmen roster, truth be told. They can bring so many different styles and just again and again show their capability as a faction. So yeah, that's Wargors. Long story short, I digressed a lot talking about them, but they're here, they're strong, very capable, and we'll talk about Vice President Gorbel here. Vice President Gorbel is a very fun little character, fairly cheap without the items and abilities. We'll flip over in a second and talk about them, but Wargors, I think, are a little bit better because they're way cheaper, and honestly get more consistent value trades than Gorbels do. Flipping over, Gorbels are basically your answer to big SEs for just a really cheap price. They've got quite a bit of HP for a single entity character unit. A lot of characters, a lot of, like, hero characters have pretty low HP totals. Like, you go over to Khorne and you're talking about their heroes having it in the 4,000 range, pretty much across the board. And if you start spending money on all the mounts is when they get around to about the same amount as the Gorbel, but then they're costing like 1,400 gold. And Gorbels, just coming in at base, they've got Blood Greed, they got a good charge bonus, they got tons of weapon strength, and they've got a crazy bonus versus large. That means that 34 melee attack, which you might think is pretty low otherwise, is actually kind of sauced. So big, expensive single entities like dragons can really get bullied by Gorbels. And these guys are way better now that they don't get pinballed into space because of whatever weird bug was in Warhammer for the longest time in 1 and 2, where that happened to them consistently. It can still happen to them on occasion. But CA's, I don't know what they did exactly to get them away from that. But they're very good at just sticking in and charging down big targets and bullying them off the field, man. With that good HP pool, kind of hard to get rid of 2 of them when they only cost 2,100 combined. And they're just a really good goon squad. But I wouldn't bring... I mean, you can honestly, maybe... I shouldn't say that. You can bring 1 and do pretty well, but I would recommend bringing Axe of Men if you do that, because this is a pretty strong ability. It gives them Unbreakable and causes terror, so you can terror out stuff, which is pretty nice. Or you can do Slaughterer's Call and make him a little mobile boost platform for all of the units around him. So if there's like a dragon attacking like your spears or something, you can like throw this guy in to buff up that melee attack and leadership. Keep them in that fight a lot longer, and also chip away at that HP with the good weapon strength and bonus versus large. And just be a good cost-effective beat stick. I mean, they'll pretty regularly get their value back. They're a little less likely to do so than Wargors, just because Wargors sneak in under the radar, while Gorbels typically get a little bit more attention, and people try to deal with them a little bit more concertedly. But despite that, I do think that they've got some serious combat potential. And they're just really decent if you think your opponent's going with lots of large stuff. They're really good against Ogre Kingdoms. They are crazy against the Ogre Kingdoms because they beat so many of the otherwise obnoxious tools that the Ogre Kingdoms are bringing in. These guys will take individual, what are they called? The Mournfang Cavalry models out pretty capably. So they can do that. They can kill lead belchers pretty fast. All kinds of funny stuff you can do with the Gorbals. And again, as I said, they're really good against like dragon type of lords and characters. So they've got quite a bit of utility. Really, the only reason you don't bring them is you oftentimes have plenty of anti-large potential from the rest of the roster. And these guys are really there in just as an in-case unit or as a mobile goon squad if you think that your opponent's bringing some grounded monsters that they can really bully. Like, Dark Elves are probably one of the strongest matchups for the Gorbals for that reason, because Dark Elf players love Medusas. Medusas can be pretty annoying, because they clear out a lot of your chaff infantry. And they can really mitigate your front line presence. But with 2 Gorbals around, they get in there and they just wallop Medusas. Even though Medusas fight back reasonably well, 2 Gorbals in conjunction in the Dark Elf matchup against either one or even against 2 Medusas is honestly pretty menacing. They do a lot of work in that matchup, and they're fast enough to avoid missile fire. With 64 speed, they're fairly maneuverable. And they've got pretty high leadership, too, so, you know, they don't break off the field unreasonably early. And they've got ITP because of Bloodgreed, of course, so, if you're worried about your Wargors potentially getting gooned out by, you know, like I said, a dragon-type character, and you bring Gorbals instead and catch your opponent out with these guys, boom, instant mega value on them. Lots of uptrade potential, but they're a little more situational, so I think they belong down here in the strong but situational category. So, this is my personal tier list. This is what I think the strength of all of these lords and heroes is. Other people might disagree with me, and they probably got some pretty good reasons for thinking so, so take everything with a grain of salt, of course. But I do think this is a pretty good starting point if you want to try out the Beastmen for yourselves. A lot of people think very, 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 like, stringently about the way units work. Like, a lot of people just say Torox is bad, or Kazrak is bad, without giving them the due that they deserve for what they can do properly. And in Dom mode, builds are so much more varied than in Conquest and Land battles. So you can get away with bringing what might otherwise not be the strongest possible unit and still get really good uptrades out of them if you know what to do and how to execute your strategies. Dom is a very execution-based game mode. A lot more so even than land battles in my book. Like, people talk about the summons being a little cheesy in Dom. I guess in a way, if you think about it, they can be. But, you know, I think just in terms of opening up diverse strategies and making more niche units usable, that's one of the reasons why I love Dom mode so much. You know, I play this game for the fun factor. I don't want to just sweat and, you know, try to be the #1 player all the time. That just sucks the fun out of games for me. You know, I'd much rather be good and have fun and play with fun units and try to get use out of them and find their niches and potential high-value scenarios than to just bring Malagor or Great Bray Shaman every single game and just try and run over people all the time. So that's where I'm coming from with these tier lists, and I really do think when you play around with the rosters, you do oftentimes find that what people might think is fairly weak actually is quite powerful with the right play style adjustments and the right strategies. So, you know, just think about it. Play around with it yourself. Let me know what you think. And yeah, I mean, I think I'll just leave this off here. I've been talking about an hour about this stuff, so I hope I gave a pretty good overview. I feel like it did. I don't think I left a whole lot out. I didn't really talk about these guys in terms of like the best possible matchups for them. I mentioned a few for some of these characters and units, but I'm wanting to try and keep these videos a little shorter and more talk about the roles that these guys fill with a couple of very specific like scenarios in which I think that they can most adequately trade. That way people just get a decent little idea of what you can do with them, and then they can experiment from there. That's really the goal of my videos. I don't want to try and discourage people from experimenting, and I certainly don't want to misinform folks. So, you know, I'd love to hear from people in the comments. Anyways, enough rambling. I'll catch y'all on the next one, and I hope y'all have a good one, and take care. Peace out, guys.